These newspaper article readings are not for the faint-hearted or the squeamish. If you're at all sensitive, I might suggest these aren't for you. If in doubt, check the description below. It'll tell you which topics are covered in this particular episode. There's both human and animal suicides, and you heard that right. There's also horrific descriptions of injuries, as well as the deaths of youngsters. So don't do it to yourself if you're prone to nightmares, is all I'll say right now. Not all the articles are horrible. Some of them are uplifting, some of them show incredible bravery and heroism. There are near misses. So these were picked as showing life prior to health and safety, as well as for the crazy and curious details some contain, with other miscellaneous happenings that kind of struck me enough to post the articles to Twitter, despite not having too much relevance to Scotland necessarily. These are worldwide topics, and they didn't have any real connection to the projects that I was working on and researching at the time. I just happened to have come across them by the way, kind of thing. So we'll get into them, shall we? What we're going to do here is we're going to do a lucky dip of newspaper articles to really mix them up a wee bit, because while I'm doing the researches, I'm obviously coming up with the same kind of terms and things. So we'll mix them up even further. So to that end, I have all of the newspaper titles and dates of the articles. Welcome to what will be the last episode of our newspaper article Lucky Dip for the time being, because we're finally running out of articles. So I don't know what we have left. I'm not sure what we have yet to come across. So this will be interesting. Yeah, let's hope that we have at least 2 positive articles. I'd like to think there are at least 2 positive articles left to see us out. I guess we'll see. Alright, what do we have first? We have the Dundee Evening Post for the 21st of October 1904. Alright. This was an article that seemed pertinent at the time. It's entitled Smallpox in Football, Medical Officers Protest. The Medical Officer of Health for York has made a vigorous protest against the playing of the football rugby match York versus Dewsbury at York tomorrow on account of the prevalence of smallpox at Dewsbury, but the York Club has decided to play the game. Alderman Border, chairman of the Health Committee, who is vice president of York Football Club, has resigned the latter position as a protest. And that's for the Dundee Evening Post for the 21st of October 1904. And, well, that was pertinent at the time that I found it and posted it to Twitter, because myself and a few other people felt like perhaps it was a bit early to be allowing football crowds to congregate and football matches to be held and stadiums to be filled before the pandemic was really over. So, yeah, that. Anyway, that wasn't a particularly negative article, which is nice. Not a terrible way to start. We have next the Aberdeen Press and Journal for the 5th of January 1907. We have a sad story now. In my introduction, I have warned people that there are animal suicides. Apparently. This is entitled A Dog's Suicide, a Strange Story. A pathetic story of the deliberate suicide of a dog on the railway comes from Crafton Park Station on the Southeastern and Chatham Railway. The animal was a handsome retriever owned by Mr. Hayward, a greenhouse builder whose yard runs alongside the platform, and having lived there for 5 or 6 years, the dog was almost as familiar with trains as the station staff is. On Wednesday afternoon, she was seen running up and down at one end of the platform. But as the animal had become a familiar visitor to the platform, no one suspected that a tragedy was imminent. Once or twice she ran towards the metals, but after hesitating a moment or two returned to patrol the platform again. At 1:45, however, when the 122 from St. Paul's was slowing into the station, the dog suddenly made a last dash to the line, and there, when the train was only a few yards away, she was seen to deliberately place her neck across the metals. In an instant, the engine severed her head from her body. 2 porters were sent to remove the remains. Though none of the station staff, being busy at the moment, actually saw the animal place her neck on the metals, several of the waiting passengers declared that it was an unmistakable case of suicide. The dog, which was a remarkably affectionate creature, had been grieving for some time, it is thought, because several of her litter of puppies, born quite recently, had been drowned. That is just a terrible story. That's just so tragic. Animals have feelings too. We know this. We've seen them help other animals not of their own breed, not of their own type. We've seen them caring for the offspring of other animals, both of and not of their own type. Animals have emotions, they care, and that dog losing her puppies like that, probably immediately, she probably had no time with them, purely just because someone considered them an inconvenience. That's a terrible story. That's just tragic. Oh, we'll have another one. The Aberdeen Press and Journal for the 9th of August, 1904. Okay, this one is entitled The American Railway Disaster. Graphic Description. Dated New York, Monday. Over 100 lives are believed to have been lost by a disaster to the Missouri Pacific Express on the Denver and Rio Grande Railway about 8 o'clock last night. While the train was crossing a bridge over Dry Creek, 8 miles from Pueblo, a terrific cloudburst and waterspout suddenly transformed the creek into a deep and raging torrent which submerged the structure. It is believed that the supports, being weakened and unable to stand the strain, collapsed as the train crossed. The train at the time was running at high speed, and owing to the intense darkness and torrents of rain, the engine driver was unable to see ahead and realise the danger. The engine had crossed the bridge when it suddenly toppled over and fell into the stream with a terrible crash, dragging after it the smoking, dining, chair and express cars. Despite the enormous weight, the force of the water was so terrible that the cars were swept away and carried a long distance downstream. It is estimated that there were over 125 passengers in the train, most of them in these cars. 2 sleeping cars at the end remained on the bridge and the occupants were saved, although some were badly injured. The spectacle of the disaster was terrible to witness. As the 4 cars were swept away in the darkness, fearful shrieks and cries were heard from the imprisoned and drowning. Those in the sleeping cars, saved by mere luck, managed to climb out and tried to do something to help the doomed people, but were helpless. The news of the catastrophe was carried to a neighbouring signal station and telegraphed to Pueblo, whence a relief train was immediately hurried to the scene, followed by a second train loaded with coffins and stretchers. 25 survivors were eventually brought back. 200 men are now searching for bodies on the scene of the accident. 50 have been recovered from the mud and wreckage, which is strewn for a considerable distance along the creek. The bodies of 2 women clasped in each other's arms were found a mile away. 3 cars were discovered in Fountain Creek, a tributary of the Dry Creek, partly demolished, filled with sand and mud and literally buried in the ruins of the bridge which had swept down on them. They are believed to be filled with dead. The safe in the express car was discovered to have been forced open and robbed. Wreckage is visible in all directions, and dead bodies seem to be lying in piles among the broken cars, driftwood and mud. Many are believed to be buried in the quicksands, whence they will never be recovered. Some of the bodies were found several miles from the scene of the accident. Hundreds of volunteers are engaged in the search or patrolling the creek to protect the property of the dead. Very little can be done until the water recedes, as the floods are making the work difficult. The wrecked train, which was known as the World's Fair Flyer, ran from Denver to Pueblo, the line twisting through the mountains and in many places being subject to frequent washouts. Many of the passengers were excursionists bound to the St. Louis exhibition. And that's from the Aberdeen Press and Journal for the 9th of August, 1904. We've covered a lot of American railway accidents, really horrific railway accidents in the duration of this series. And this is just another to add to the list. I would have said that there wasn't much that could be done of that. It could be seen as an act of nature. But then at the end it says that in many places it's subject to frequent washouts. Would you not then expect the company that owned that part of the railway to perhaps divert lines to places less likely to experience washouts? Do you maybe not expect these companies to have provisioned more to safeguard against these washouts? There's going to have been things that could be done to prevent these accidents, but all of it is going to have cost money. And if there's anything we've learned about the railway incidents, it's that the companies really, really didn't want to spend anything that they absolutely didn't have to, even if it meant saving the lives of passengers and their staff. So that was another rather tragic article to cover for our last episode. Do we think we have a good one to finish us off, perhaps? I'm not sure how many we have left. I think there's perhaps just the 2 left. We have the Falkirk Herald for the 5th of June, 1907. Nice. We have rather a more positive article, I guess. We have a year ago, the sympathy of the playgoers was extended to the music hall artiste Miss Dot Stevens, who, during a railway journey from Wolverhampton to Glasgow, fell out of the train and had her feet partially amputated by a passing engine. Owing to the skill of the doctors at the hospital at Wolverhampton, Miss Stevens has now recovered. She can walk without difficulty and proposes to return to stage life next month. That's from the Falkirk Herald for the 5th of June 1907. And for 1907, that's a hell of an operation for those doctors to have completed with such success that she was able to walk almost as if the accident had never happened. To go from having your feet almost amputated at the start of the 20th century, if you consider the amount of injuries that seemed not to be fixable from the First and Second World Wars even, it's almost unbelievable that her feet were saved to the point where she could just continue as she had done before. So I like that article. That's rather positive. I don't know what we have last. Should I be scared? I don't know. We should be positive. Let's be positive. It's a Glasgow paper to finish us. We have the Glasgow Evening Citizen for the 11th of December 1866. So it's also an older article to end us. I like that. Now let's see what we have for 1866. Okay, so it seems like we're ending on a kind of negative mystery, I guess. We have the mysterious death of the Edinburgh Detective. A gentleman signing Edmund Morrison writes to the Times of yesterday with reference to the death of the Edinburgh detective named Cameron, who was recently found drowned in Dunsapie Loch, suggesting that the unfortunate man may have been killed by an aerolite. He says, according to the report, there are no reasons for apprehending that the death was caused either by foul play on the part of others or by any ordinary misadventure on the part of the deceased. The man met with his death on the night of the periodical visitation of aerolites. May he not have been struck by one of them and have been precipitated into the water and suffocated? It is but a very few years since that a brother and sister were driving in an open carriage in Tuscany, and the former of the two was suddenly half stunned by a blow on the head from a small aerolite, which was picked up immediately after the accident. The occurrence was notorious at the time, and the injured individual trustworthy and well known. A second instance of the fall of an aerolite occurred lately in the garden of an intimate friend of my own at Florence, on which occasion some of the inmates had a narrow escape of being struck. The middle was examined by us, and its specific gravity exceeded that of a bullet. And that final article is brought to you by the Glasgow Evening Citizen of the 11th of December, 1866. Aerolites. I assume they mean like meteorites? Like small fragments of formerly space-bound rocks that have made it into our atmosphere and to Earth. I assume that's what he means by aerolites. I'll look up a definition and put it here. So, that would be a rather unusual way that detective died. Perhaps he would have had the mental constitution to have solved that mystery had it happened to anybody else. I mean, that would be really unlucky of him if that's how he died. Because people do not get struck by these things very often. They tend to land in mainly uninhabited regions just because that's what most of the world's made up of. Just large stretches of ocean and uninhabited land, deserts and such. I don't know. That is an interesting article to end on. So on that note, I don't know if maybe there will be a second series, perhaps after some future newspaper research. But for just now, that's it for our newspaper article Lucky Dip. Thank you very much to Yvette for loaning us her hat for this endeavour. And we may see you for season 2. Take care.